Hello again. It's been a while. Don and I have kind of taken the summer off from making podcasts, but we're back in business again. So welcome to podcast number 18, Plato's Cave Allegory, The Nature of Ignorance, and Pepperoni Pizza. Now, in a shameless teaser, I'm going to tell you that to find out what pepperoni pizza has to do with this, you're going to have to endure until the end to find out. We have discussed the Plato's Cave allegory before in relation to the world we perceive being an illusion, hiding a deeper meaning. But like all good allegories, interpretation can be fluid. This podcast will consider a different interpretation. Plato's story of the cave is presented by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work, The Republic. Here in this podcast, we will want to consider the effect of education and the lack of it on our human nature. It is written as a dialogue between Plato's brother Glaucon and Plato's mentor Socrates, and is narrated by Socrates. Plato's cave metaphor illustrates the cognitive trap of ignorance, where we may be unaware of the limitations of our own understanding. Here is a brief linear outline of the cave allegory. Starting from the top and going to the bottom, 1, 2, and 3 are outside the cave, and 1' through 3' are inside the cave, and they are somewhat mirror images of each other. At the top, outside the cave, the first frame, number 1, has the sun. The sun is a form of the good. The next frame beneath that are natural things, which Plato called forms, things like trees and mountains and things in the world that surround us. Frame number 3, still outside the cave, are reflections of these natural things, and you can see the reflection of the tree there in the river. These are abstract things that are reflections of natural things, and Plato speculated that mathematical objects fit into this. Now we migrate inside the cave. Frame number 1' is the fire, which is analogous to the sun outside the cave. Frame number 2' are artificial objects. These are physical objects, visible objects we can see, similar to the natural forms that were in frame 2. And finally, in frame 3', we have the shadows of artifactual objects. These are the allegorical images of the shadows on the wall of the cave. So here we have a graphic that mimics what we've just seen, but encompasses the whole allegory. At the top is the realm of forms, which has the sun and the various forms and represents the world of truth. Below that is the cave, which is illusionary. So we'll get into the allegory right now. Plato begins by having Socrates ask Glaucon to imagine a cave where people have been imprisoned from childhood. These prisoners are chained so that their legs and necks are fixed, forcing them to gaze at the wall in front of them, and they can't look backward at the cave or at each other or themselves. Behind these prisoners is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners is a raised walkway with a low wall, behind which people walk carrying objects, things on sticks or puppets, of men and other things. The people walk behind the wall, so their bodies do not cast shadows for the prisoners to see, but only the objects that they carry. The prisoners cannot see any of what is happening behind them. They are only able to see the shadows cast upon the cave wall in front of them. The sounds of the people talking echo off the wall. The prisoners believe these sounds come from the shadows. Socrates suggests that the shadows are reality for the prisoners, because they have never seen anything else. They do not realize that what they see are shadows of objects in front of a fire, much less that these objects are inspired by real things outside the cave, which they cannot see. They have no other memory of life, since they have been imprisoned in this way since childhood. In such a benighted state, they pass their days. Now, you might say human nature itself is ordered to quit cave dwelling. We need our ordinary, everyday, humdrum certainties. We cannot stand very long outside the cave. We need to live by caricatures. The struggle of the soul to come into its own autonomous existence is a struggle against unexamined presuppositions, the unexamined life, taking things for granted. The body is not the prison of the soul. On the contrary, the prison is constituted by second-hand knowledge, idle talk, average everydayness, mediocrity, and yes, even fake news. The soul comes into its own by separating itself from everyday life. This is the paradoxical nature to Plato's invitation to transcend the cave. He is asking us to outthink the very grounds of our thinking. Science, and in particular physics, deals with the world of form, and mysticism, or the spiritual, deals with the formless. Both are important, but they cannot be equated. So now Socrates then supposes that the prisoners are released. A freed prisoner would look around and see the fire. The light would hurt his eyes and make it difficult for him to see the objects casting the shadows. If he were told that what he is seeing is real, instead of the other version of reality he sees on the wall, he would not believe it in his pain. Socrates continues that the freed prisoner would turn away and run back to where he is accustomed to, that is, the shadows of the carried objects. Socrates continues, suppose that someone should drag a prisoner by force up the rough ascent, the steep way up, and never stop until he could drag him out into the light of the sun outside the cave. The prisoner would be angry and in pain, and this would only worsen when the radiant light of the sun overwhelms his eyes and blinds him. Slowly, his eyes adjust to the light of the sun. First, he can see only shadows. Gradually, he can see the reflections of the people and things in the water, and then later see the people and see the things themselves. Eventually, he is able to look at the stars and the moon at night, until finally he can look upon the sun itself. Only after he can look straight at the sun is he able to reason about it and what it actually is. Notice in the graphic that the escaped prisoner outside the cave is now a philosopher. Socrates continues, saying that the free prisoner would think that the world outside the cave was superior to the world he experienced in the cave, and attempt to share this with the prisoners remaining in the cave, attempting to bring them onto the journey he had just endured. He would bless himself for the change and pity the other prisoners, and would want to bring his fellow cave dwellers out of the cave and into the sunlight. The returning prisoners, whose eyes have become accustomed to the sunlight, would be blind when he re-entered the dark cave, just as he was when he was first exposed to the sun. The prisoners who remained, according to the dialogue, would infer from the returning man's blindness that the journey out of the cave had harmed him and that they should not undertake a similar journey. Socrates concludes that the prisoners, if they were able, would therefore reach out and kill anyone who attempted to drive them out of the cave. This place of ignorance is not merely a dark cave. It is a prison, a deprivation chamber. As we contemplate this predicament, we're likely to acutely feel a mental claustrophobia, the absence of freedom in any meaningful sense, and the numbness and despair that would set in from such a deprived state. Freedom is, at its core, the ability to move. Beyond meeting our basic needs, bodily movement, including change of location, leads to new experiences, enables learning, and generates perspective. But confined in such profound ignorance of the cave, the world of experience is severely restrictive. Plato regards this plight as worse than imprisonment or servitude, more akin to death. He quotes Homer's Odyssey, saying, "Better to be the humble servant of a poor master and to endure anything than to live and believe as they do," referring to the dead that dwell in Hades. As Plato anticipates, we feel a deep sadness at the absence of any chance to understand, or achieve anything of value, or experience beauty. The horror of ignorance lies in its incapacity. We mourn the loss of opportunity to comprehend, to accomplish, and to appreciate anything meaningful. This account of their predicament is not, of course, one that the prisoners themselves could offer. They neither understand nor can comprehend their situation, as all life's experiences for them are merely shifting shadows and echoes. Plato asserts that prisoners would in every way believe that the truth is nothing other than mere shadows. Indeed, they won't even suspect that what they see are shadows, let alone grasp the concept of a shadow. They while away their time in trivial games of shadow prediction, oblivious to their keepers, the fire, and the parade of objects going on behind them. They feel neither claustrophobic nor deprived. The actual circumstances of their confinement in the dark cavern, the possibility of escape, and the notion of an incandescent world of wonders above remain unknown and totally unsuspected. Life simply is what it is, what it has always been. They do what they do and feel what they feel because they know nothing else. They are ignorant. But we know, and it is terrifying. Through his narrative, Plato has given us privileged knowledge of their situation. We know what they do not. We can affirm their ignorance. Are we like these cave dwellers? To think this through, I want to reverse Plato's approach. Rather than describing how we may know the truth, let us consider how we recognize ignorance. No one is born educated, and even the most learned individuals remain ignorant about many things. Often we can pinpoint our ignorance precisely. For instance, you might have extensive knowledge about automobiles, but lack a specific piece of information, such as the number of carburetors standard in a 1955 Ferrari Roadster. This common form of factual ignorance allows you to identify exactly what you do not know. Based on your existing knowledge, you understand what you need to learn before you learn it. You know what to research, essentially. Moreover, you can anticipate the nature of the possible answer, one or two, rather than 100 or a totally nonsensical answer like pink or animal carburetors. Consider, however, that you've never heard of the Ferrari automobile. Despite your familiarity with antique car manufacturers and models, you might be surprised to learn of a make that had slipped past your knowledge. Or imagine that you're less of an expert, only knowing the names of a few sports car brands. In either case, you've had some idea of what acquiring this new knowledge would entail. You could outline its general parameters beforehand. You'd understand, broadly speaking, what learning about an unfamiliar automaker would involve. Given this possibility, you could identify what you don't know. though with less precision than in the first example. We can define such factual ignorance because we possess other relevant general knowledge, in this case about cars, their manufacturers, and terms like roadster. In these everyday situations, our existing knowledge serves to highlight and sharpen our awareness of our own ignorance. Consider, however, that you've never heard of the Ferrari automobile. Despite your familiarity with antique car manufacturers and models, you might be surprised to learn of a make that had slipped past your knowledge. Or imagine that you're less of an expert, only knowing the names of a few sports car brands. In either case, you have some idea of what acquiring this new knowledge would entail. You could outline its general parameters beforehand. You'd understand, broadly speaking, what learning about an unfamiliar automaker would involve. Given this possibility, you could identify what you don't know, though with less precision than in the first example. We can define each factual ignorance because we possess other relevant general knowledge, in this case about cars, their manufacturers, and terms like roadsters. In these everyday situations, our existing knowledge serves to highlight and sharpen our awareness of our ignorance. Our world encompasses countless realms of knowledge, and each of us remains ignorant of many. Even those exceptionally well educated, with expertise in multiple fields, might find themselves at a loss when confronted with such things as ichthyology, Chinese porcelain, or even maybe Sanskrit grammar. In such cases, our grasp of what we don't know becomes less defined. We're uncertain about what it truly means to possess such knowledge. However, if we understand relevant technology or are familiar with related subjects, we might glimpse the nature of this missing knowledge. Our responses to these unknown fields can vary. We might have no interest in learning about them at all. We might actively avoid them, or even resist attempts to be educated on the subjects. Alternatively, we might decide to delve deeper and master them. Regardless of our approach, we can still identify these gaps in our knowledge, albeit with varying degrees of precision. So let us pause to amend the fundamental point. Ignorance may be recognized and ascribed only from the perspective of knowledge, and the knowledge we possess determines the degree of specificity of the ignorance we recognize and serves to characterize the ignorance and its importance. This is why we readers of Plato can recognize that cavern as a place of profound ignorance, lacking in truth and sustained by deception. Utter ignorance, for which the dictionary offers the term ignoration, is even more profound. The prisoners in Plato's cave do not know what they don't know. They don't even know that they don't know. They dwell in ignorance, unable to recognize it. Ignoration is thus a predicament, a trap, one incomprehensible to those caught in it. In a sense, they aren't in a place at all, but rather in a placelessness where one doesn't even know one is lost. Paradoxically, this trap has a simple solution: learning. Yet it's remarkable that escape occurs at all. How does one learn what one doesn't know one doesn't know? The prisoners can't free themselves. More crucially, they lack motivation to escape, as even that desire would require a sense of possibility they don't possess. Their bondage seems natural. It's their form of life, worth nothing better to them. They can't see their ignorance as ignorance. In Plato's account, the unenlightened must rely on accident or the beneficent intervention of others for the crucial first step. A prisoner is released from his bonds by happenstance. What follows his relief is not a swift and purposeful escape motivated by eager anticipation of the waiting outside world. It is only the slow, hesitant, gradual, painful process of learning itself. The newly released prisoner is hardly keen for enlightenment. He is compelled to stand up, to turn his head, and he is pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he's seen before. He is stupefied and wants to return to life as he knew it. Plato asks, and if someone dragged him away from there by force, up the rough, steep path, and didn't let him go until he had dragged him into the sunlight, wouldn't he be pained and irritated at being treated that way? Who the someone is doesn't matter at this point, except that it cannot be another prisoner. But it is clear that this is an educational intervention. It is necessary for finding the truth. It is initiated from without, and it is literally coercive, requiring the forceful overcoming of the learner's resistance. He'd need time to get adjusted before he could see things in the world above. Plato acknowledges. But eventually, as understanding flows into him, he'd count himself happy for the change and pity the others. He finally comes to know the sunlit world of wonders, and then he understands with horror what his condition was in the cave. And as we have heard, he would rather undergo anything than return to that place of ignorance. And here's the crucial point. Human beings tend to prefer cognitive comfort, the reinforcement of the familiar, to an encounter with the unknown. Plato thus legitimates the claim of educational paternalism, the infamous age-old dictum that parents say to their children and teachers repeat to their students regarding all sorts of coerced activities. You will thank me for it one day, because then you will understand. His justification rests on the distinctions between knowledge, mere belief, and ignorance, and on the transformation of the soul that learning can produce. Regardless of the likelihood of latter gratitude, however, if accident or intervention or coercion is required to start one on the path of learning, then the escape from utter ignorance is not self-motivated. And that does not seem surprising. Would it be reasonable to pursue a goal that one does not possess and cannot envision? A self-initiated escape would not be a reasonable decision or even a live option. But that explains only why the prisoner would not seek to escape. What explains his resistance to freedom and the need for coercion? One factor is that, in general, human beings tend to prefer cognitive comfort, the reinforcement of the familiar, to an encounter with the unknown. Learning may disrupt our cognitive comfort. It displaces us. Education requires us to revise or abandon our routines, our recipes, and our rituals, life as we know it. And to do so, we must overcome a kind of natural cognitive inertia. A place of ignorance can be a sturdy nest of cognitive comfort for those who dwell within. Just as an aside here, do you know how difficult it is to find a good picture of horrified troglodytes in a cave? There's not a whole lot of them. I hope you're amused by it. Anyway, Plato's benighted cave dwellers believe they already know the important truths. Then the prisoners would in every way believe that the truth is nothing other than the shadows of the artifacts on the cave wall. We know, of course, that their knowledge is not worthy of the name. It is no more than pointless familiarity with contrived images. And when forced to widen their experience and comfort their illusionary situation, they are nonplussed, irritated, and even pained. We understand. It is painful for any of us to accept the revelation that our precious knowledge is false, that we have been deluded, and to confront the radical implications. Assumptions must be discarded, insights misguided, principles betrayed, relationships undone, lives are altered, and worlds shattered. False knowledge can be sticky. It is difficult to remove it and all it implies from our worldview. Belief can be a bulwark against learning. The ignorance that hides in false knowledge is disguised as the very learning it defines. These considerations may cause us to question whether Plato's cave is, after all, a place of utter ignorance. It may indeed be home to deep ignorance, but the prisoners have beliefs about the shadows. They make cognitive claims and seem confident that what they believe is true, however deluded it may be. Actually, some of their beliefs are confirmed by their experience. Some prisoners are adept at identifying shadows and remembering the sequence of their appearance. Perhaps it is possible to discern a human situation of complete and total ignorance, ignoration so abysmal that no thin shaft of understanding penetrates it. One wonders how beings in such a situation could survive without any knowledge, without a single belief that is true. So, we've arrived at the end of our little discussion. What better way to end than by contemplating the pepperoni pizza of knowledge and ignorance? Our needed knowledge is the pepperoni on a background of cheesy crust of acceptable ignorance. Hopefully you aren't a person that picks the pepperoni off and throws it away, like all of my younger grandchildren. Knowledge like pepperoni can be too spicy for some. To ascribe ignorance as a mental state is to imply a capacity for learning, which in turn implies a capacity for knowing. A potential for knowledge is embedded in ignorance. Moreover, the ascription of ignorance is relational. It is made from the vantage point of someone's knowledge about the lack of knowledge in an otherwise knowing person. Ignorance and knowledge are concepts that cannot stand alone. They presuppose each other. It seems as convoluted to describe absolute and complete ignorance as to describe absolute and complete knowledge. Ignoration and omniscience are comprehensible only as a limiting concept. To conclude, so are we like Plato's cave dwellers, not just in infancy, but throughout our adult lives? It seems we are, at least in one important way. I refer to the unsettling fact that we too are haunted by things we do not know that we do not know. And we cannot imagine how drastically knowledge of those unknowns would alter our lives and our view of the world. It is Don and I's hope that our podcast can at least help define your knowledge pizza. Thank you again.